Hello, I'm Logue, and this is Let's Talk Consciousness, an ongoing discussion about any number of issues that can possibly be tied into the assumption that reality is a manifestation of consciousness. That, in brief, we are all the universe experiencing itself subjectively, if you want to take that view of things. And if that's the case, what do you do with that? How does that inform your day-to-day decisions or your feelings about your life and the people you interact with? I think it can change a great deal if that's the way you're looking at things, and so that's why I do this. I'm basically sharing that point of view for anybody who's interested and talk about pretty much anything and everything that I can relate to that lens of looking at reality. So, one of the things that I've experienced multiple times with doing this project, and this started in 2015, I actually have a whole set of recordings that are audio only that I did for a while. And at a particular low point, I kind of rock bottom. But since there are multiple points that I felt this way, I guess it wouldn't be ultimately rock bottom. But at various low points when I felt like I had fucked up in some way and had no business giving any advice to anyone else about the quality of their consciousness or things to improve their consciousness. And I think that's a dilemma that is just part of being human. I mean, there are some people who maybe look at their own lives and don't feel like they have major catastrophic moments, or give in to victimhood, or feeling other than feeling responsible for their own circumstances, instead feeling disempowered and like the world is out to get them in some way. I mean, it could be a lot of things, but this is the way I experienced it in particular, because I think it seems like the lowest form of consciousness is victim consciousness, just that feeling of complete disempowerment, and that what is happening to you is just this cruel outer external force. When getting at this consciousness point of view, if we really do manifest our conscious experience, even down to the circumstances that we find ourselves in, it means that we are ultimately responsible for those and have to basically have poise and some sense of empowerment and being able to handle it, to do something about it. Because that's a spiritual idea, I find that one really big support structure for that would be the idea that if you are setting about to have this experience from a kind of spiritual point of view, you're going through something hard to improve the quality of your consciousness or discover what you're made of. If that is the case, you're likely going to put some pretty difficult obstacles in your way, and it's not meant for you to fall down on your face and just feel like a piece of shit and that you're not capable of doing anything about it, and worse yet, blame others around you. I don't think that's, I mean, if anything, if that's the point of an experience, it's the point is to get out of it, to find your inner strength and your sense of equanimity, or magnanimity. I forget which word it is. But that quality of being able to take what the world hurls at you. And it's not one that a lot of people have, I think, without a lot of work. It seems to be slogging through a lot of difficult experiences that you earn that. And it's not to blame people, if they do feel like they're in a difficult set of circumstances they can't possibly control. Like, that's a relatable feeling. But I think that is kind of off the table as an excuse if you are accepting this assumption that the reality that we experience is a manifestation of consciousness. And I'm, of course, bypassing all the reasons I think that, because I've covered it in so many videos that I'm just kind of past that at this point. But the work that you do with that can be difficult. So you can fall on your face and feel like, God, I how could I, even think I'm remotely evolved in any way when I find myself doing the things I'm doing. And so the thing that I've encountered with this YouTube project, I was about to say it and then kind of sidestepped it, is that anytime I'd have that kind of setback, it usually became clear to me at some point later, sometimes soon after, sometimes much later, that those are the things that, I wouldn't say make you qualified, but those are the things that give you something worthwhile, something worth sharing. I mean, not to just talk incessantly about my worst experiences or failures. I don't mean to be overly negative. In fact, I feel like I've kept a lot of that negativity out of this. But I have had experiences of big setbacks, and whether it would be the lowest point of feeling like, what's the point of even going on? Like, that would be at its worst, which I've been through. That was actually the first big stumbling block. I had been doing 6 months to a year of recordings and building up to putting them online in 2015, and then I had, at the end of 2015, like, just this really, through a set of life circumstances, just found myself at my lowest point. And it was all tied to being disempowered. Like, after I got the sense to get back on my feet, I put the YouTube thing on the sideline for like another 6 months to a year. But my own work I was doing at that time was to realize that this big, massive, unclimbable wall that you see in front of you isn't always so impossible to get over. Using that metaphor, there are ways to find toeholds and things to do. Knock some bricks out, whatever it is you want to use that metaphor for. But the point is, looking back on it, I realized it was only through seeing, even just starting with small problems, it was only through seeing that I was capable of dealing with these issues that I got the sense of, like, oh, I can continue on with this YouTube project because I'm not a complete fraud. I'm not actually claiming to be enlightened. I think that's a point, because I had this hurled at me, and I'll explain that in a minute. But I'm, if anything, I like the phrase, spiritual seeker, because it puts the word right in there that you have not got all the answers and that you're looking for a better understanding. And I think that ultimately we find ourselves in a huge mystery. That's our birthright, is to try to delve into that mystery. And a lot of people just surrender it and just put it off on someone else and just are handed an answer that they find acceptable or avoid the question. I mean, no judgment there. It's just, I see that a lot. And some number of people want to delve into the difficult questions and want to look at a myriad of answers to try to find what best suits them and what resonates with them. I like Bruce Lee's approach, as it's been reiterated a lot by Daniele Bolelli, who has the Drunken Taoist podcast, which is a good listen if I could endorse that. But the thing that Bruce Lee brought to martial arts was this idea that you don't have to be dogmatically loyal to a certain tradition, that you can take what works from various traditions and apply it as you see fit. And now we have mixed martial arts, where you have all these different approaches and all these different disciplines and different fighters. I'm not really a big MMA person, but all these different fighters who specialize in different things, and they have to test the efficacy of their ideas against each other. And I think that translates to an approach to philosophy that being tied to any sort of particular point of view tends to be a setback. But anyway, back to the feeling like you're a failure. Basically, that's the thrust of it. With my experience, it hasn't been isolated to that one setback. Like, I've had smaller ones since then that feel like, oh, maybe I am a fraud. Like, maybe I'm full of shit. I'm talking about forgiveness for yourself and others, and yet I have, moments where I'm losing composure. And I'm not proud of it, but I'm not really a very angry person. I tend to be pretty gentle in my day-to-day life, but at a certain point, I'll lose my grip on that, and like at worst, like punch a wall. And unfortunately, I did that recently, and it's pretty shameful and embarrassing. It's not what a level, balanced person would do, but I find myself in the midst of sorting out all sorts of different kinks in my consciousness that have to be unkinked. And I think we all have the work we have to do. So I'm not really embarrassed by it, when I step back from it and realize learning to handle any emotion, anger being one of them, but any emotion with a sense of balance and a sense of detachment that allows you to see when you're being out of balance. I've handled that in so many areas of my life, but this is one where I'm still working on it. So it's like, it feels like it's embarrassing, but I share it because I think lying to myself about it and saying I'll leave this out and talk about the letting go of these rushes of feelings that put you in a negative cognitive state, that's something that you might hold on to as resentment or hate towards somebody. If I come off like I'm just talking about it but I don't experience it, there's a little dishonesty in that. In fact, what I've found is these things tend to happen right after I record something that kind of circles around the issue but does not address it. And then I'll find that life will hurl that thing at me as if a reminder, a quick uh, crash course in that particular lesson where I was maybe staving that off, talking about it, feeling like I was comfortable in my own sense of, evolution or my quality of consciousness, and being reminded by this conscious experience that I'm manifesting, that there are some areas that need work, and don't forget, these are things that are gonna rise to the surface when they're ready to be dealt with, and so that's one of them. So I have to live with the embarrassment, but also share it, because I think there are other people who probably find themselves in a similar circumstance, particularly if they're like me, where I'm not quick to anger. So when there's a kind of like boiling over, it doesn't come out in a constructive way. And this is something with like, physical fighting. Like, thankfully I didn't do any of that. I just mean, looking back on like middle school, where I remember the first time that I had to push somebody to basically make it clear like they couldn't bully me any longer. And where it escalated, I could have stopped it earlier with a little more assertiveness, and it escalated to a point where I had to push this kid on his ass to let him know like I'm not going to take that anymore. And all the points leading up to that were also very embarrassing, because I was being too submissive, and thinking that just being right in the moment that this kid's an asshole wasn't enough. And particularly in a young school age, people aren't looking at it in an adult way where they see the bully as being the asshole. They just see strength and weakness. So it's a more primal development uh, area. But anyway, so my example is that when people who are not used to fighting step into that like they think they know, they're probably going to get their ass kicked. And thankfully that hasn't happened to me, as far as losing that bet in my mind, or losing the perception on the moment that that's not called for. In fact, I've only had to defend myself 3 times in my life, and it was all really justified based on the circumstances. But I'm not going to go into that. It's not important. But so I point that out to anybody who has despair, that they're maybe on some kind of consciousness expansion path, and then feel really shitty because they did something really fucking awful, or that they felt weak or out of control, or whatever it might be. Depressed, anxious, any of those things where you don't feel like you're expressing a good positive quality of consciousness. Understand that you can take ownership of it, and to see it as a challenge. It's not easy. In fact, in the moment, it's rare that I actually see it as I mean, sometimes I do, but the more central it is to my tension, or where that grossness or scar tissue lies, metaphysically speaking, the closer it is to like a raw area or an open wound, the harder it is to see the spiritual lesson in it until I'm able to get away from it a little bit. But sometimes with certain things, I can see it right in the moment and act on that awareness, and it's something that improves over time. So I do recommend seeing the utility in that, trying to see, if you're looking at why is this fucking shit always happening to me? Why do I get into these relationships? Why do I always get these jobs? Why do I always have this dynamic with a friend, or whatever situation you find yourself in? It's because you have something to learn from it, and you're being stubborn, or just not waking up to the potential that you may have an active role to play in your own development, and you can't just leave it up to the world to do it for you. It's going to drag you along, but essentially you have to pick yourself up on your feet at some point and walk. So with that in mind, I wish you all well on your journey, and hopefully you don't find yourself that far down on your face, but if you do, just pick yourself up. There is a reason that this is being handed to you, and it's really hard to see that in the moment, and don't let people tell you that you're well, this is what I'll get to. One last thing, having it hurled at me that in that moment with that behavior, that's the furthest thing from a compassionate, conscious person. That's definitely true. Like, and you'll see people who seem to be kind of going in that direction, whether it's a YouTube personality or whoever, that whether it's exposed or not exposed, they're having those human moments, and there is some embarrassment that is going on in their lives, publicly or privately. And it's a facet of being human. This is a difficult plane to exist in. And we're trained out of a lot of our best tools for dealing with this world. So give yourself a little slack, and realize if you're getting back on your feet and attempting to expand and develop, there's always more to learn, and always more shit to knock you on your ass. But anyway, as I said, be well, and If you like this, please hit the like button, subscribe, share. Appreciate comments. I always try to be responsive and respectful, and hope that you all do the same. And enjoy your now.